Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is a special edition on Patriots Victory Day, which will be celebrated for the 81st session that is going to be on Thursday. And to discuss about it, I've got you a historian that is the one and only Tesfaye Arage. He's a researcher at the National Museum of Ethiopia. We'll discuss about everything about history because we need historians in order to explain what the real and tangible things whenever we talk about history. Thank you for blessing us with your time. So whenever we talk about this Victory Day and Patriots Day, the year from 1935 to 1937 is also called the Second Italo-Ethiopian War. Why is it called the Second Italo-Ethiopian War?
This is mainly because it was the second time for Italy to make an attempt to conquer Ethiopia. In the first moment, of course, there were a lot of conflicts between Italy and Ethiopia, but this is a conventional, the most pronounced war. The first one, Italians were being defeated at the Battle of Dogali, and they lost a number of people, their soldiers, but still they tried to attack Ethiopia, and they defeated at the Battle of Adwa. So after making preparation for 40 years, the Italian again try to control Ethiopia for the second time, and that's why we call it the Second Ito-Italian War.
Definitely, it's the Second Italo-Ethiopian War. And whenever we talk about the things that led to the resistance, that led to the major war, and that led to the freedom of Ethiopians, one of the things that came out to be an incident is the Welwel incident that came out to be true. Tell us about the Welwel incident and that led to the major war and the things that take us to historical lane towards the occupation of Italy.
So some people used to refer the major war mainly because the emperor and the army commander were at that front, but the war was happened in three-fronted attacks from different directions, but mostly the war is called the major war. But the major war, some people refer to as caused by the Welwel incident. Welwel is an oasis which is found in the Ogaden, but parts of Ethiopia, and the Italians found a pretext to make full-fledged war against Ethiopia. It was not the cause, but it was simply the Italians used as a pretext. The real cause of the war causes were, one, the Battle of Adwa, which was the humiliations for the Italians. The Battle of Adwa was not the war between Ethiopia and Italy, but it was also the war between whites and black. So that war, the victory of Ethiopia, thwarted, the notion of white superiority, and it proved that Africans are equal to the white peoples. There is no superior white race or, inferior black race. So Italy considered as, symbol of shame for the whole white peoples because Italy from, European nations were being defeated by the black Africans. So Mussolini planned to revenge or salvage this, victim, this humiliation, and restore the pride of Italy and the whole white peoples by making war against Ethiopia. The second cause was the Italians, as any colonial power in the meantime, wanted to have colonial access in Africa and to dominate the whole parts of the region of the Horn of Africa. And the third, Mussolini wanted to resettle his populations because the Ethiopian climatic condition is, a good climatic condition, which is moderated, hostile. Very important and favorable for the whole peoples, which is far apart from the infested, Sahara. So he wanted to resettle his population after having controlled the whole parts of Ethiopia. This is the three causes that led to the battle of what you call it Macho or the Second Italian War.
Why are they successful this time? Because Ethiopians were victorious against the white colonialists in the Battle of Adwa, 1896. But this time at the Battle of Maicho and the other battlefronts, this time, they came to be successful. Why?
Definitely, this is a good question, which nobody just, ask it, say kind of good questions, which, leads our, roots, our faults. The very notions for the victory of Italy over Ethiopia, or the second time, was not, as people said that, the military superiority of Italy, and the armaments, the poison gas, whatever the case. The very notion was, there was, divisions among Ethiopians for, many, for 20 years. After the coming of Haile Selassie in power, he tried to control, the whole regional, particularly the 4 Amhara regions like Wollo, Gondar, and Gojam, and he declared war on, regional lords. So there was war in Shoa between the Wollo and the Shoa group at the Battle of Sagale that consumed the whole society, the cream of the nation, the Adwa peoples who grew up in the war. And the second war also, the Battle of Kwana between, Ras Guksa, Wale of Begemder, and the central government. Again, many people lost their life there. So the third time, there was conflict in Gojam. Then many people, lost, their life. And many people were being disappointed, especially the regional lords, did have, negative attitude towards the central government because they were being subjugated by Emperor Haile Selassie. Then Italy used this, as a litmus paper, used to divide, the nations, as the Bible says that a house divided against itself cannot stand. The Ethiopians were not, in a strong line, united together to front the Italian attack. That's why, the fundamental. The second reason was, lack of, preparation for the Ethiopian side. Once Mussolini took power in Italy, he planned to invade Ethiopia. And he arranged his people into aging group, like, Bakolo or whatsoever, the she-donkey, the she-wolf, the son of the she-wolves, and different aging groups that inculcated, this, notion of war and boasted the Italian people, and he did ready, his people to make war against Ethiopia. And the second, there was no good military leadership in the meantime. Haile Selassie is not qualified enough in the military aspect. So because of those factors, the Ethiopians were being defeated easily, and Italy controlled Ethiopia. For temporarily, of course.
Definitely, it was a temporary occupation. So that takes us to the historical lane of Italian occupation now. I want you to tell us about the Italian occupation and the resistance, the fervent resistance of our forefathers in order to keep the integrity of Ethiopians. And now, there is one thing that Ethiopians will remember to the last day of their life, that is the Addis Ababa massacre.
Definitely.
So I want you to tell those things in a historical lane.
Once Italian controlled, Addis Ababa, not controlled the whole parts of Ethiopia, people started guerrilla fighting everywhere. Even, they try to recontrol Addis Ababa, like, the Kasa brothers, Abuna Petros, and many people try to control, Addis Ababa, but they failed. And finally, Italy controlled, certain amount of, towns, the centers, but people went to the forest and ready to make war and started a guerrilla fighting, hit and run. So Italians were being suffered a lot. And finally, here in Addis Ababa, Rudolfo Graziani invited the Addis Ababa people, some people in Addis Ababa, to appease them, to get support for them. But unfortunately, the two Italian boys, actually, Mogas Hasgudum and Abraham Daboch, he just throw a bomb against him. He just escaped from this slightly, and he took revenge. So Italian people is slain in a blood of, a bath of blood in Addis Ababa. Many people lost their life. The massacres of Addis Ababa even embittered the whole nations of the people. And it was a black symbol for Italians, of course. So it's instigated the peoples. What enemy is enemy? So that is, the massacre of Addis Ababa. Of course, we lost a number of people, but it encouraged us, as you know, iron just gets strong while it was heating. So the Ethiopian people, ready to make war against Ethiopia, and Italians against Italy, and Italians suffered a lot, and finally they lost.
Definitely,
The
but
political battle.
yeah, I know. But Tesfaye, as a historian, as a person who knows a lot about history and the media coverage, I think we don't mostly cover the history of the occupation of the Italians and the resistance which has been led by our forefathers. What's your take on that?
Definitely, we need, to work, A lot of things is going to be done. I mean that we simply said the battle of this one and how Ethiopians managed to get that battle, and we didn't study yet, the military strategies that Ethiopians used, both in the guerrilla fighting, in the conventional fighting, how Ethiopians managed to combat, the well-trained Italian army with, armored with modern firearms. That's why still we need to investigate our roots and our cause and the factors that helped us to get victory, not only in the Second Italian Wars, but always throughout history. In Ethiopians, most of the Ethiopian history dominated by conflict and war, and Ethiopian got victory. But the secret of what is the secret of that victory? One, courage of the people. It's very important. Two, the military skill we inherited from generation to generation. That's why nobody can still study, but it needs to be investigated further. What kind of military strategy Ethiopians use to attack their enemy, how they retreat, how they manage to escape from enemy, how to reattack, how to hit, and how to run. This is the very important point what you raised. So we need to study.
Going to the other parts that we need to talk about is I think the foreign relationship of Ethiopia during the exile of Emperor Haile Selassie I and the period of occupation of the Italians, that is from 1936 to 1941. What was the period like? What was the foreign relationship like? What was the exiled life of Haile Selassie like?
That relation is in a sort of dormant, from the very beginning, Britain and France, the major part of the period, and members of the League of Nations tried to appease Mussolini by sacrificing Ethiopia. So that is why. So the emperor, once he lost his battle, he exiled in Britain, and he tried to live in a hotel, and he lost his money, and then he just go to Bath, somewhere 170 kilometers south of London. He lived there, but he communicated with many communities like the American, African Americans, and the British intentionally saw him as a medicine of emergency time. And when Italy joined with the Axis powers, automatically they took him from Bath and promised him to support a military assistance and send him back to Sudan, and they organized a military group named Gedeon in Sudan. And if you ask me about his life was a life of exile, but sometimes he tried to communicate with the international community. He blocked, they blocked him. They just tried to mishandle him, but he was very strong in diplomatic aspect. He resisted them, he retains them, and finally he come out with victory.
So we can say that our foreign relationship at that moment was directed because of our demands, not because of us having set the demands that we need. Because of the demands that the Axis powers and the Allied powers had, they came to us rather than we being accepted as an aggressed state, an annexed state, to be given the supports that we need, to be accessed in the supports that we need, to be helped in lots of ways, especially in the war crimes that the Italians have made, putting the mustard gas and everything related.
Don't forget that they are whites and they were in favor of whites. But the very important notion which you rose, even in the time of Menelik, the Europeans were, vacillating, to check the balance of, the strengths of, the Ethiopian government. If get powerful, they supported you. If you fail, they just push you. This is, the diplomatic missions of Europeans. They are always doing in favor of, their political interest. But in the case of Haile Selassie, he stayed there. He just, did a prophecy of a speech in Geneva. So it was proven that the aggressors' powers invaded even, Britain. And the British supported, most people say that British supported Ethiopia, but actually the British supported themselves. They were endangered by, the fascist and the Nazi coalitions. Even the Nazi party attacked, the Italians also attacked, Egypt and the Sudan and the Kenya. So they just were ready not only to defend and to salvage Ethiopia, but also to defend their colonial interests. It was, a mutual interest. So they supported him, the emperor, and he organized, his own military. Actually, it was a very small, and Wingate used, the name of the army, Gedeon. Yeah, because he used the prophecy of the Bible, the mythology of the Bible, Gedeon. David, who killed, Goliath, a very giant, and similarly, the small Haile Selassie in terms of size or, political strength, and fought against the giant Italians. So symbolically it was happened. So they invaded, they attacked Italian forces from different directions, as the Italians did previously. So the Gedeon force, with the help of, is under the command of Emperor Haile Selassie, and Wingate came from the western direction, the other force from the northern direction, and the other force from the southern direction, and Italians were being sandwiched in Ethiopia. And fortunate enough, and ironically, it is very interesting to raise this question, the Nazi, the Axis power, were the first time being defeated in Ethiopia. And it was, the first time Ethiopia attacked, from the member of the nations. The Italians violated the covenant of the League of Nations.
Before the World War II.
Yes. So it was happened again, the victory. And the death of, fascism, announced here in Ethiopia. This was, a historical coincidence.
Amazing. A historian giving us what needs to be heard, because we need someone like you in order to straighten up what is said across Ethiopia, across the world, in order to give a credible, authentic history of Ethiopia. And thank you for doing this. One thing that I see as a similarity is the hoax news, the fake news that has been distributed by the West, especially with that of the BBC and CNN and other big media networks, in order to give false narratives, especially with the TPLF being on the vicinity of Addis Ababa, trying to control Addis Ababa. And then there was this story that was broadcasted by the BBC where students were trying to harvest different crops from different sections, but they portrayed it as if they were engaging in a war. These were part of the hoax news that we have seen. And they came up with S3199 and HR 6600. So I think there is some kind of similarity. Whatever they believe in, if they want to punish you, if they want to target you in some way, they can do this. What's your take on that?
Let me summarize with a good, proverb. Some people say that, history repeats itself. But history is not, a living action, but it is human who repeats the same mistakes or the same thing which was happened. And the Europeans are the Europeans. It is a way how just to perceive them sometimes seems to be a difference. And what was the fundamental cause, the awareness and the other peoples to reestablish such kind of Ethiopian map? It was a fruit of colonial powers. Italy managed to succeed to separate first Eritrea, and then the Wayane and the other peoples who followed, who borrowed the policy of European colonial powers and implied here in Ethiopia and divided the Ethiopian peoples into different lines, nations and nationality, which was, written by Baron Roman Prokaska, which was already, mentioned by many peoples. So they are always, doing their favor. And that's why our ancestors were strong enough, brilliant enough, they challenged them, but in the meantime, we are not strong enough to challenge them, even to appreciate what our ancestors did. So there is no difference for them, but the difference is, our, perception towards them. If you are strong enough, they supported you. And they always want a dirty people to play a dirty job here in Africa and in Ethiopia. They found Saddam Hussein, and they just killed him. Then they found another superior person to be giant and to use him for their dirty purpose. So this is, the Europeans. But we never escape from, world politics. So we should have to be good diplomats, as, our ancestors did, as Menelik did. Menelik knew everything what they were doing, but he handled them properly. So we are supposed to handle, the current situations. It was happening in the time of Iyas, if you remember that. They made a forged, photograph as if he were a Muslim. So they destroyed him and it took, Emperor Haile Selassie. So this is, the game. So better to advise our people to know their history and to understand what they are doing. Who is, the friend of Ethiopian people? The Europeans, who is in favor of the Tigrayan peoples? What kind of relation do you have? We have commons. We have the same ancestors, the same historical background. We follow the same religions. We are the same peoples, but they try to divide us and use them against us or us against them. So this is our negligence to understand what they are doing.
Definitely. Well explained, sir. So the other issue that I like to relate to, that I like to discuss about is the issue of coincidence whenever we talk about history and the savior. I mean, the Ethiopia has been rescued because of some kind of coincidence. There are some historians who believe that Ethiopia was saved because of a certain coincidence. Do you think that is plausible? For example, let me explain with what the coincidence means. That coincidence came out to be true because we have seen in 1940, for the first time, the Italians attacked the Commonwealth countries and the Commonwealth occupations like that of Egypt, Sudan, and Somaliland. And they tried to occupy the other states which have been in the hands of France and Britain. So, unless Italians have attacked that of the occupations of the Britain and France, there's no way, there's no chance that Ethiopia could be rescued at that moment. Do you get what I'm saying?
Sure.
So, do you think that coincidence saved us?
I believe in God. But I never believe in superstitions. Of course, there are lots of coincidences. It's related to Ethiopia with, the other world. I don't know these miracles, but nobody can just reveal it. It is out of, my capacity. To remind, to start from the very beginning, the whole great nations, in the meantime, the Portuguese, and the Turkish conflict happened in Ethiopia. Always it was happened in the case of Ethiopia. But the very important, point to be remembered here is that victory is not materialized, from heaven. It is not bestowed, as a souvenir from other peoples. It is not, a commodity that you can buy from a shop. We paid, life. A priceless, value for, victory is. Nobody can compare victory with other things because victory is everything. So our ancestors lost their life. And another issue to be raised here is that there was a room, to defeat Italians. The Italians in Gojam lost the whole parts of, the province, and they just, camped at the town. They were suffered, by, Ethiopian Patriots. And, the British simply supported, the Ethiopian army, the guerrilla fighters, maybe. And in the case of this, miracle, I don't know, the name of Ethiopia mentioned in the Bible so many times, more than any and better than any else in any country in the world. Maybe God always helped us, but still our effort is not denied. So God always helped us, and we are justice. The root cause for the victory of any people is justice. We never just invaded any nations outside Ethiopia. So they invaded, they tried to control Ethiopia, and we defended our motherland, our fatherland. We have the cause. And we never mishandled, even, the captured, the Italian army. That is why, previously I mentioned to you that, the white people always believe that whites are always kind and superior for everything. And the blacks were and still are savage. But Menelik, captured the Italians and handled friendly. Even in the Battle of Adwa, the Italians buried, the dead soldiers buried properly before and better than Ethiopians themselves. So this is maybe, the source of our victory.
True. Going forward with my question, the one thing that I like to discuss is the way that Ethiopians allied with the force of Britain and other forces in order to claim Addis Ababa, May 5th, 1941. Take us through those historical lanes, and I want you to talk about the support from Britain too, especially with Major Wingate, as his name is still remembered in one of the schools in Addis Ababa.
A month before, May 5, Emperor Haile Selassie reached at Debre Marcos, and the British soldiers with Ethiopians controlled Addis Ababa. The emperor planned to come to his capital, but the British blocked him, under the pretext of, the Ethiopians, attack or will take revenge on the Italians. And they mishandled him for a month. And Emperor Haile Selassie with Wingate were there, and they came after a month. That is why people confused the victory day of this. Some people in the time of Dar celebrated before a month. The believing is that the Ethiopian soldiers reached in Addis Ababa, but other people celebrated, suppose the victory as the victory day of the day that concerned with the arrival of Emperor Haile Selassie and hoisted his flag in Ethiopia. But still, the actual independence of Ethiopia is not achieved or was not happened. So the Emperor Haile Selassie came here in Addis Ababa. The British, planned Ethiopia to control Ethiopia under enemy-occupied territory, and they created a new administration. It is based in Kenya. They assigns their own, purpose. But this is, the action of Haile Selassie, Emperor Haile Selassie. He vigilantly, fought against, the British and the other powers. He's a very ironic person in terms of diplomacy. He managed to handle, to get his independence after a long, struggle against, the British military force. So finally, actually, still, we were lucky enough, the world, new order changed and decolonization already had started. So many supporters, were on the side of Haile Selassie. We managed, and it is very miracle. From the first victory, from the Italians, lost their battle here, or the occupations of Addis Ababa by the coalition force of Ethiopia and Britain. The second struggle was much bitter and longer than the armed struggle, the diplomatic struggle. That Haile Selassie was a champion, and he managed to succeed. Actually, we are lucky enough.
Thank you for doing that. But whenever we talk about, again, the issue of the flanks of different corners of military crew, for somebody who doesn't know history, I want you to take us through the different flanks and the success in Addis Ababa on May 5th, 1941.
Definitely, some people, the British played, I'm not quite sure. One general, yes, he marched from northern parts of Ethiopia. He controlled Karen after a very bloodshedding war, and then he moved towards the south, and then Emperor Haile Selassie with Wingate from the west, and his other Cunningham from Kenya, and it was Cunningham who managed to reach in Addis Ababa, mainly because the British did not want Emperor Haile Selassie to ahead from Cunningham. This was, the reason. So even, on May 5, though the British still, here occupied, arrived in Addis Ababa and driving out the Italians from here, still the Italians managed to control Gondar, and some parts of the country were under enemy. So the battle was happened after a year. It was finalized after, General Nazi surrendered at Gondar on December after, a year or 8 months.
Let's now talk about the aftermath of the war and Victory Day. In 1947, history knows and states that there was this Paris Treaty where Haile Selassie I was recognized once again as Emperor of Ethiopia. And we have seen Italy for the first time paying fines for the wrongdoings that she has done. Tell us about those.
The Paris Conference, the main intentions of the Paris Conference was to determine the Italian occupied area here in North Africa and somewhere in Europe, and the issue of reparations or war indemnity, and to handle, minorities. So there was a debate, Some people say that enemy occupied area before the beginning of World War I, before the invasion of Poland, but we were being invaded before that. So Ethiopia was not part of that. And some people say that Ethiopia should be just incorporated with enemy occupied. So after a long debate, Haile Selassie managed, to be a victorious and recognized as partners of, the allied powers, and Ethiopia joined as charter member of the United Nations, and then Haile Selassie and his group asked indemnity or reparations of compensation or war indemnity for the Italians. So that was the issue. So it was very important. It determined the issue of Eritrea, which was formerly before the beginning of World War II under Italy, and Somali, British Somaliland, and the others. And finally, Haile Selassie managed to come out victorious in all aspects, and Italy was forced to pay war indemnity. But the problem was we are not yet, ready how much we lost and how many items, and we are not yet. We did not have, the culture of registrations of all items. So we never get, as it was expected, and equally to the material were lost. But one issue is still, a very important issue to be raised. Once the British control here in Addis Ababa, they tried to take, the Italian properties from here and smuggled it to Kenya and others. So they took a lot of materials, like, company, factories, and gold, and all materials, all properties they took, and, used as, compensation for their help.
I'm seeing some kind of similarity. With treaties, there comes to be some kind of trust between the crews that are having those treaties. And whenever we see the treaty, it's not officially a treaty to be exact, to be authentic. But with what is going on here in Ethiopia, there's some kind of reconciliation, there's some kind of truce, humanitarian truce, as it is called, between the TPLF and that of the Ethiopian government. Is there any way that we can believe the words of TPLF now? As I am concerned, I'm seeing some kind of pattern with what the Italians have done back in the days.
Historically, there is no, similar crimes who did, in terms of, its own people, like that of, the TPLF. The TPLF fought on the side of, Italians. They fought against, on the side of Somali against Ethiopians. They always, got involved in every aspect of Ethiopian life and disturbed. So they are already just, vagabonds. They are not, they are, a bandit, an official bandit, well-organized bandit. You never consider them as a diplomat, as a politics. They always, striving for, destroying Ethiopia. So how can you compare them with other issues? Because they are inborn. it is a sort of parasite, but unfortunately, we are, living with them, and still they are alive. But better to separate the people, of Tigray, which, we believe that, the symbol of, Ethiopians, literally, everything already, we started our history from there. And I don't know the reason, but they are not, reliable, for their words. They are, a cheater. And fortunate enough, they control power and ruled Ethiopia for, nearly, 3 years. But how can we compare them with other, noble peoples? Italy is much better than, the Somali, the TPLF, The Italians never did. The Italians never forced a man to be raped by a man, but the TPLF did here. So I have never seen in history, even never read such kind of, cruel peoples, vagabonds, a certain organization who just created problems, for his own people and for his own, even, the people who considered as, fighting for him.
That's truthful, honest, and I thank you for your passion and honesty. So whenever we talk about this Patriots Day, this Victory Day, the one thing that comes to mind is the bravery of our forefathers and the unrelenting unity of our forefathers. So what are the lessons that we can learn from this amazing day that we are celebrating?
Surprising enough, our generation sometimes, I don't know how we understood things, Nothing is similar in the world. The world is, multicolor. We would have, of course, different language in one nation, but we have one common nation. And we have different ethnic background, of course, but we are one people. Not as, peoples as they used to call instead of. And we should have to live or create or build a multi-ethnic complementary people, not supplementary. And the other issue, this is, one common denominator in our history, Victory Day. Not only, the people who we know in name, but there were lots of unnamed people who lost their life, from every corner of the country, from every ethnic group. So this is a common victory, the common currency, the common currency which used, for our coming generation. It is a cornerstone which we proud of it, similarly. It is, our common value. So better to celebrate, this Victory Day, because not only the people who died already, they lost their life for their nation, but for our future, for the coming generation. So this is, why we learned from our ancestors. Let's unite together, fight our enemies, and then celebrate our victories.
That's the energy that we need right now. Going forward with my question, I think one thing that we can learn from our forefathers is the unstoppable unity and togetherness that they have while defeating the enemy, that is the Italian enemy. So in a country which has seen institutionalized ethnic division, how can we create this unity that we are yearning to get to, that we are wanting to get to?
Better to understand, the division which categorized by, language, teachers. They categorize people, Semitic, Cushitic, in terms of language, not in terms of blood. We are similar. Genetically, we just count common ancestors. You are similar with me and other people. You cannot differentiate the Somali or the Afar or the Amara people or the Tigrayans in terms of blood. But in terms of language, yes. So better to understand what people say that Semitic, Cushitic, Umitic, which means their language, not their blood and skin. It's one issue. So we are not entirely dissimilar. So we have a lot of common, and better to find our commons. And we must be ready for not debating, not arguments, but common understanding. Better to find what is the problem of yours and sit, change your seat here, and I try to yours, and feel what I feel. This is the way how people to handle the unity of the nation. And there is no similar people in the world. There is no one kind of people. If you go to in England, the royal family speak different language that of the common people, but they are the same nations. But the former political agenda and the discourse, they use the pronouns you and me, or I and me, you and they. This is a sort of division, but better to find our commons, and better to find, celebrate, and appreciate what our ancestors did. They buried in one, buried under one grave. Better to find, what they did and how they managed to defend their country for centuries and more than, and, hand over this independent nation when the whole blacks of Africa were being colonized, which is Ethiopia is the background of independence, not only for Ethiopian people, but the whole symbols of Africa. So that is a way how to handle.
Thank you for that insight. Going forward with my question, the one thing that I like to share is the fact that I believe that our forefathers taught us lots of things: unity, standing for a cause that we believe in. And one thing that we have uniquely across Ethiopia is the standing in unison at the cause of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, at the cause of standing against poverty, at the cause of uniting for the cause of the territorial integrity and safeguarding the sovereignty of Ethiopia. I want you to share some light on this.
Conflicts, rebellion, uprising, religious intolerance, whatever, blah, 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 were not the real cause of the peoples. The real cause of for conflict is poverty. So better to fight this poverty so as to defend our unity. And in terms of the guard, people are making history, but they never appreciate or recognize what they are doing. We are doing history now by making that huge dam. So this history, this dam might be a good example for the whole lots which we have discussed, our commons. Every man and woman, every people from different positions, both in abroad, Ethiopian citizens, and here, contribute a lot for the construction of that dam. So whose property is that dam? It is the whole Ethiopian nation, as the March of Victory, which our ancestors did a lot. Actually, they paid their life, but we paid our money. They shed their blood, but we shed our sweat. So this is a great chance for our generation, this generation which are making history, and the next generation will appreciate and will be respected by our son and grandson for the coming, because we created this huge artificial dam, actually, which is very important both economically, politically, and even diplomatically.
Thank you for that. We need that because it's one of the things that we stand for. That's one of the things that we give our blood and sweat to. I'm coming to my last and final question. Now, on the 81st celebration of Victory Day and Patriots Day in Ethiopia, there are some challenges, there are some pressures that we are witnessing. There's this conflict that we are trying to avoid against that of the TPLF. There is some drought in some parts of Ethiopia. There is this price rise that we are challenged by. How do you think is the best way, what do you think is the best way to celebrate this day?
The very important idea is endure the unendurable. Our ancestors passed all sorts of challenges. Things are not in a bed of roses. So we are not, smashing, putting, a knife into and better, rather than we should have to trying, better to work hard, better to maintain our peace and unity, better to minimize our economic, and better to teach our children about the value of what a country means, and better to teach the value of unity, which is source of strength. That is why we will pass. The old generation passed more terrible things more than we encountered today, and this is our chance, and I hope we'll just pass this with victory.
Thank you for that. Any final idea, any final remark that you need to say?
The very problem in the case of Ethiopia is when we say unity, we consider it as unique and oneness. It is entirely different. And there is no one color. We better, find a solution for every aspect, and better to find a new color. Instead of black and white, better to find the gray area for every aspect. And we are always, polarizing things in terms of religion, the left and the right, in terms of politics. Find, a common ground, a middle ground, a golden mean. That is why people survive together. Unless and otherwise, we never live together. If you are, polarized things, better not to find, false and a negative image, making a negative image out of, a mole and created a hill. So instead of, such kind of, finding a divisive factors, better to find our, common values in the past, in the present, and in the future. That's why we live together. This is, the problem of the whole parts of the world, not only in Ethiopia, but people handle them. It was happening in other parts of the world, but problem is we fail to handle things, and we exaggerated in everything. And the people in the Facebook, I don't know what they are, doing. They never feel responsibility. They are making business out of, terrible things, out of the deaths of people, out of blood. So better to teach them, please stop this. You are wrong, and we need proof them they are wrong.
Historian, researcher at the National Museum of Ethiopia, Tesfaye Arage. Thank you for blessing us with your time. That's all that we've got for you inside this Victory Day special program. From me, as second Mulcater, it's a bye-bye. Thank you for all who facilitated this program.